Well, good afternoon, everyone. We are now in chapter 11 of Will Be Gone, and this chapter is entitled Emergencies. And really, it's more about emergency response than it is about the emergency itself. We got five major things that hit us: fire, floods, hurricanes, tornadoes, and earthquakes. There are a few others. Even wind can be very damaging. Um, I think what you're going to have to consider, and I think it's going to have serious consideration, is how are you going to respond to these things when you don't have gas-powered vehicles to get to them? A lot of the engines on say the fire trucks, I think the fire trucks, in order to get that pumping going, you have to have the engine going, which is a gas-powered engine. Well, is that going to be workable with an electric engine or something similar? I don't really know. Um, what you may want to start thinking about. Remember we were talking about putting a set aside for the military? How much oil do we have to set aside to allow the military to protect our borders for many, many, many years? Well, you may want to think about that for your emergency crews. I mean, think about it. You got ambulatory services, you have fire, you have police. I mean, all of these things require action, and they all require trucks being able to get to and from, or cars, responses. And in a world without oil, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? I mean, it may come like, say, police. You may find that you might be having a lot of smallish substations dotting your entire town, so that a policeman or two policemen or something like that cover a 1 mile radius or so, and with shortening the distances of their response area will allow them to, even in a small electric vehicle, if you will, that will enable them to get to something in a pretty responsive time. If let's say, for sake of argument, you took where a policeman lives and his radius is a half-mile, which is 1 mile across, but his radius is a half-mile from where his dwelling is. It doesn't take long to get from point A to point B in a small, electric vehicle. A half-mile. I mean, what's it going to take? A minute, to get there? There's not going to be traffic. You don't have to worry about that. It's not going to be traffic like we had, today. Um, Rush hour is going to be a thing of the past. You're not going to have that anymore. That's going to be totally different. Um, so it's a pretty big consideration when you think about it. I mean, look at our ambulatory services. An ambulance comes, picks you up. Depending on your city, your hospital may be 10 miles away, depending on how your city's outlaid. I got a feeling that the big hospitals that you see are going to become obsolete, and you're going to have to go back to kind of like what they call clinics, only instead of it being just a simple clinic, it's going to be, you'll have an operating room and you'll have a staff in there, and they're going to be able to take care of you. But they're not going to be the big, bulky buildings that you see right now that we call hospitals. The response time to get to and from, could be totally different than what it is today. We live in a pretty nice society. I've always thought that when you look at the time zone that we live in, from like 1940 up until the time we actually do run out of oil. But those are going to be the sweet times, because once oil is gone, that whole world changes, and how we respond to these emergencies is going to be a big deal. That's why I was talking earlier about maybe the possibility of realigning our cities and all that. It's It's a tough decision. I mean, you know, you're just not going to have the same type of thing. I'll give you a classic example. We had a fire here recently near me, and there were 10 to 15 vehicles that responded to this one fire that was out in 5 minutes. Now, I was just thinking to myself, what a waste of resources for such a simple fire. That seemed like extreme overkill to me. Of course, they could have had some training vehicles out there and people training. I don't know how that was all about. But in the future, I mean, you take a high-rise building, if it catches on fire, how are you going to put it out? You won't have that same type of response that you had before. Hopefully, if you do have a high-rise, it's got a very good water system in it, and that takes care of it. But, this is going to be something that I think city planners should start thinking, seriously, giving it some real serious thought. In the future, without oil, it throws everything up in the air. There's not going to be much of a, comprehensive emergency response like we have today. Look at forest fires out in, say, California. Right now, they have the ground guys going out there, but they also get air support. You have helicopters flying, giving water drops, and you have airplanes that fly by and drop retardant. Well, in a world without oil, you're not going to have those kinds of things. And that's why I say I just don't think the comprehensive response we have today is going to be the same in the future. It may be one of those things where you as a state, especially out west with those forest fires, you may have to analyze how much gas you guys use in a year with all your emergency vehicles, and think about, buying up and setting aside a reserve of oil so that, when the time comes, you just build a small little refinery there for your emergency vehicles to pull up on and replenish themselves. So when you think about in those terms, do we really have 200 years worth of oil left? If we're going to set aside, 182.5 billion gallons for the military to give us 1,000 years of service, how much are we going to be able to set aside for local emergencies? And when it comes down to it, catastrophic, when a hurricane hits, man, oh man, getting help from other states isn't going to happen like it does today. When I went through Hurricane Hugo in South Carolina, we had, electrical companies from I don't know how many different states. They had a station set up near me in one of the parking lots of a complex, and it was it was like a military army response in a way. There were hundreds of trucks there, and they came from all over. How's that going to happen in the future when you don't have oil? If a state is smart enough to put aside oil for the future use, you're going to use that to help another state? I don't think so. Because the more you do something like that, and it's great that they do if they decide to do that, but when you do that, you're using up that oil reserve you set aside for your own needs. So I think emergency response in the future is going to be a very, very difficult thing to do. And I don't really have a whole lot of suggestions for it. I will say one thing about forest fires. I've seen a video online or on television, and just as an example, and it might not fit everything. It's probably not going to be a panacea, suggestion. It may work for some topographical areas, but not others. But the thing that I saw that was interesting is that they had this grass field that was burning, and there were trees in there, and the camera angle showed, grass about 2 feet high or so, and it showed these trees with low-lying branches, so that when the grass got to the tree, there goes the tree. It just went right up. And I was sitting there thinking that, if they cut that grass down to where it was only a couple inches high, and they took those tree branches and they cut them up to where the lowest branch hung about 5 feet or so, that tree would never caught on fire. That brush would have just burned right around the tree and went on its way. The tree would have still been standing. Naturally, if it's wind blown and embers are flying everywhere, that may not help out at all. But you take a fire that doesn't have any wind associated with it, and you have that, I guess you could say, the hillside manicured, to where the grass is cut every year and the trees are not allowed to hang down low, then you just might be able to, stave off a massive fire and might be able to put it out quicker, just because of taking that action of cutting the grass and trimming the branches. Don't know. I mean, like I say, there's probably a lot of survey work to be done by people, especially out in California and Colorado, places like that where they do have a plethora of trees and natural forest growing. You guys are going to be the ones that really have the most work. It's not so much on the East Coast and even the central part of the country. Sometimes we get those droughts and we get those burn situations, but most part, our fires on this side of the continent just really don't become anything big. So, you guys are going to have to consider that, and hope that you can begin the discussion soon, because 200 years goes by pretty fast. Take care.